New Atlantis was never meant to be humanity's last stronghold. It had begun as a floating city-state in the mid-22nd century, designed as a maritime research hub that drifted across Earth's oceans. Elegant spires soared above its steel-reinforced decks, while submerged domes housed labs and living quarters. Over time, as climate change wreaked havoc on coastlines and warfare devastated old superpowers, New Atlantis became a refuge for millions. Still, no one foresaw the arrival of the Zhoren. The day they descended, the night skies burned with streaks of violet. Alien ships cast silhouettes across the clouds, bristling with prismatic spines. Their transmissions hammered every frequency with a single ultimatum. We claim your seas. You will serve us, resist, and perish. Humanity resisted. The old Earth Federation, battered yet unbowed, mobilized what navies remained. They combined forces with New Atlantis to defend Earth's waters. But the Zhoren were centuries ahead technologically, harnessing energies that could boil oceans and conjure plasmatic storms from the air. Within weeks, entire fleets vanished, coastal cities fell. New Atlantis alone remained afloat, a beacon on the wave. This is the story of how that last bastion of humanity refused to sink, of how ordinary people, driven by desperate courage, forged alliances under the sea and discovered new ways to fight back. It is the chronicle of an ancient planet rising to meet a cosmic threat, proclaiming that humankind would not drown in alien tyranny. Alina Serrano had grown up aboard New Atlantis, her earliest memories shaped by salt-laden winds and the ever-present lull of waves beneath the deck. Her parents were oceanographers, part of the original science teams who studied marine biodiversity around the drifting city's hull. When the Zhoren invasion began, she volunteered for the city's fledgling security force, quickly rising through the ranks with her calm leadership and skill in crisis response. She strode across the main concourse in the early morning light. Overhead, the sky was bruised with purple storm clouds that simmered with unnatural electricity. The Zhoren vessels had seeded the atmosphere with exotic particles, a show of force that announced their presence. It made Alina uneasy. Even the sea roiled with unnatural tides. At the concourse's edge loomed the Atlantic Gate, a massive steel barrier designed to protect the lower levels from rogue waves. A garrison of volunteer guards stood watch, all wearing worn uniforms. Supplies were scarce, especially after the Earth Federation's defeat on the open seas. "Lieutenant Serrano," came a gruff voice behind her. Captain Darius Wu, second in command of the city's defense corps, approached. He looked exhausted, as though he hadn't slept in days. She saluted out of habit. "Sir, any new intel?" He shook his head, stifling a yawn. "Command's picking up strange signals from the south. Might be a scout craft. We still have no idea why the Zhoren want our oceans so badly. The entire planet, sure, but focusing on the seas? Something's off." Elena glanced at the swirling sky. "They've hammered half the major ports. Maybe they're searching for something hidden underwater." Wu grimaced. "You read my mind. In any case, we have bigger problems. Last night, a fishing barge was attacked by some kind of alien drone swarm. We lost 5 people before the barge managed to limp back to dock. Morale's shaky." Elena closed her eyes briefly, feeling a swell of anger. "If we can't protect our own waters, how can we protect the city? We need new tactics, something to fight drones and scouting parties without draining our resources." Wu sighed. "Agreed. That's why I called you. We want you to lead a recon dive to the old Atlantic shelf site. See if there's any Federation relic or salvage we can use. Word is, before the Federation collapsed, they tested advanced submarine weaponry. Maybe we find something to even the odds." Elena felt a twinge of excitement. She'd grown up diving around New Atlantis, though never this deep into war. "Count me in. Who's on the team?" He handed her a data slate. "Your pick from the Sea Rangers. We leave in 2 hours. Meanwhile, keep your eyes open. The city's on edge." Elena nodded. She stepped away, mind already racing. If the rumors were true, the Federation had once experimented with something called a Hydrolance, rumored to pierce any known hull. Could that be enough to repel a Zhoren battleship? She didn't know. But after all humanity had endured, she was determined to find any scrap of hope. 2 hours later, Elena found herself in a cramped, submersible hangar beneath the city's southern platform. Here, the hull's underside opened to an expanse of open ocean. Floodlights illuminated swirling plankton. A pair of sleek mini-subs, each able to carry 5 people, waded along submerged rails. Her team of Sea Rangers gathered around her, some adjusting diving suits, others checking scanning equipment. The Sea Rangers were a motley group. Retired sailors, marine biologists, ex-Federation Navy. They shared a bond forged by countless underwater expeditions, studying reefs, rescuing trapped submarines, fending off pirate raiders. Now they faced the greatest threat in Earth's maritime history. Lena addressed them in a low voice. We're heading to the Atlantic Shelf site near what used to be the Azores. The Federation had facilities there, rumored to house advanced prototypes. We suspect the Zhoren might also be prowling that region. We go in stealthy, gather intel, retrieve anything we can. Understood? They nodded solemnly. Among them was Dr. Nils Begum, a marine engineer who wore thick glasses and carried an underwater tablet crammed with old Federation schematics. Another was Sergeant Terrence Rhee, a soft-spoken man rumored to have single-handedly fought off a Zhoren scouting drone with a spear gun. Each had a story. Each was determined to protect the city they called home. Elena split them into two squads, each aboard one minisub. She took the pilot's seat of the lead craft while Dr. Begum manned the sensor array. A hiss of pressurization signaled the sub's descent. The ocean swallowed them, gradient shades of blue turning darker by the minute. As they slipped away from New Atlantis, Elena let out a slow breath. The sub's instruments displayed currents, salinity, and hints of unnatural radiation, lingering side effects of Zhoren atmospheric seeding. Occasionally, they spotted glowing jellyfish that had mutated from the bizarre environment. Earth was changing under alien influence, but humans adapted too. They always did. Begum tapped a monitor. Picking up faint signals. Could be old Federation beacons. Distance about 90 nautical miles. Elena nodded. Steer us that way. Keep our active pings minimal. We don't want to draw attention. The second sub followed at a careful distance. Outside, fish flitted among submerged ridges. Twisted metal from long sunken ships jutted like tombstones. Every so often, Elena glimpsed large shapes drifting in the gloom, possibly whales or mutated sea creatures. In this war-torn ocean, one never knew for sure. Hours passed, punctuated by short bursts of comm chatter from the second sub. Then Dr. Begum's voice sharpened. I'm detecting an energy signature that's definitely not Earth-based. Azimuth bearing 125, about 15 minutes out. Elena tensed. Could be. Or a leftover Dominion from the Federation era, though that's less likely. She set her jaw. We keep going, but proceed with caution. If it's Zhoren, we might glean valuable intel. As they neared the shelf, the ocean floor sloped into a massive trench. The sub's spotlights revealed the remnants of a collapsed underwater facility. Broken domes, twisted steel girders, algae-choked tunnels, no sign of life, or so it seemed at first. Then they spotted a faint glow in a half-intact building near the trench's edge. Sergeant Rhee murmured through the comm, Let's do a quick flyby. If the structure's stable, we might dock and explore. Elena guided the sub carefully, searching for a docking port. She found a large airlock hatch, half buried under silt. With practiced skill, they latched onto the access port, establishing a seal. Meanwhile, the second sub hovered at a safe distance, scanning the perimeter. Once the sub's interior pressure equalized, Elena and a small team donned diving gear. Dr. Begum stayed behind to monitor sensors. With a soft whoosh, the sub's side door opened into frigid, murky water. They swam toward the facility's hatch, prying it open. Inside was a half-flooded corridor that angled downward, lit by flickering emergency lights that must have run on nuclear or geothermal backup. Rhee whispered through helmet speakers. Feels like a ghost ship. It did. Rust and seaweed coated the walls, floating debris drifted in the gloom. They advanced carefully, flashlights cutting bright beams through the dark. Then Elena saw something that made her blood run cold. Scorch marks. Not from Federation weapons, but from some kind of directed energy. Zhoren? Possibly. They pressed deeper, discovering a large chamber that once housed submarine prototypes. In the center lay a partially dismantled craft. A submarine with a sleek hull bristling with odd protrusions. Federation insignia remained on one side, scoured by some plasma. A series of tubes lined its prow, reminiscent of torpedo launchers, but more advanced. Rhee swam over, excitement in his voice. This has to be the Hydrolance, or a variant. If we can get it working, it might punch through anything. Elena tapped her comm. Dr. Begum, we found a prototype sub, uploading visuals. Can you check if it's salvageable? He responded a moment later, voice crackling with static. Design matches the Hydrolance project, potentially operational if we can fix the power source. But... He paused. I'm picking up movement above you. Something active in the facility. Alina's heart thumped. She signaled Ree and the others to form a defensive perimeter. They flicked off most flashlights, letting the watery gloom conceal them. Sure enough, a faint red glow emerged from a corridor overhead. A shape glided into view. A mechanical drone with spindly limbs. Where its head should be, a pulsating orb cast an eerie radiance. Ree cursed quietly. Zhoren tech. The drone pivoted, scanning the area with a low hum. Elena motioned for her team to stay hidden behind the sub. The drone drifted closer, luminous orb stuttering. It reminded Elena of a spider exploring a web. She steadied her pulse. If the drone detected them, it would likely summon reinforcements. Suddenly, Ree's comm beeped. The drone twitched, turning toward them. Elena hissed, "Open fire!" In the tight corridor, the team's weapons flared. Underwater pulses from specialized rifles battered the drone, but it darted away with unnerving speed. Return beams lanced from its orb, scorching a chunk of the sub's hull. Elena grimaced. This was not a simple Federation leftover. The Zhoren must have discovered the facility first. Ree aimed a short-range EMP device, pressing a trigger. A bubble of electromagnetic force expanded, crackling in the water. The drone convulsed, limbs jerking spastically. Then it collapsed, trailing sparks. The red glow faded to black. Silence returned, broken only by the hiss of their regulators. Elena exhaled. "We need to move quickly. If that drone was connected to the Zhoren network, others will come. Let's see if we can remove the Hydra Lance's power core or something salvageable." They split into pairs, prying open panels on the sub. Indeed, behind battered plating, they found a cylindrical device, pulsing faintly. Federation markings indicated a high-density power cell. Next to it was a guidance module for the Hydra Lance warheads, sealed behind a reinforced hatch. Elena's eyes gleamed. "This might be enough," she said. "Even if the sub is too damaged, we can adapt these systems for New Atlantis. Let's get them out." Working swiftly, they unbolted the modules, carefully stowing them in waterproof crates. The entire time, tension coiled in Elena's stomach. She expected more drones to appear at any moment. Thankfully, none did. Possibly, the facility's degraded state prevented a large incursion. Finally, they retreated to the corridor. The path back to the sub was clear, the only sign of trouble being the limp drone's remains. They sealed the hatch, rejoining Dr. Begum inside the mini-sub. The second sub checked in, reporting no further contact. Elena felt a surge of hope as they powered away from the facility. With these Hydra Lance components, New Atlantis might gain a new line of defense. But beneath that hope churned a darker realization. The Zhoren had found the site first, likely searching for advanced Earth weapons. They would not stop until they'd stripped every corner of the seas. The clock was ticking. News of the retrieved Federation tech ignited cautious optimism in New Atlantis. In the city's main engineering bay, dubbed the Bay of Wonders by grateful citizens, teams swarmed over the Hydra Lance modules. Elena watched from a gantry as Dr. Begum conferred with half a dozen engineers. Blue sparks flew from a welding torch. Sparks of a different sort, however, crackled between anxious scientists as they debated how to integrate the alien power demands. Below them, the rest of the engineering bay thrummed with activity. Submarine parts lined one wall. On the other side, lines of sea drones were being retrofitted with new sensors. Captain Wu stood at Elena's side, arms folded. He wore a heavy expression. She glanced at him. "Any sign of a Zhoren reprisal after we destroyed that drone?" Wu sighed. "Satellite glimpses show increased alien activity near the mid-Atlantic ridge. We suspect they're building underwater fortresses, probably to stage deeper assaults on us. So far, we haven't been directly attacked." Elena clenched her fists. "We have to assume it's only a matter of time. If these Hydra Lance modules can be adapted for use on our subs, maybe we stand a chance." They descended to the main floor, weaving among busy technicians. Dr. Begum spotted them and hurried over, wiping sweat from his brow. "Progress, but not easy. The Hydra Lance uses a specialized form of superconductive plasma that can be shaped into warheads. We have enough parts to build maybe 3 warheads in total, assuming we can replicate the unique reactor field." Elena frowned. "Only 3? He raised both hands in a calming gesture. "We might do more if we find more materials, or if we risk deconstructing the entire power cell. But that's dangerously unstable. We'd need an advanced containment ring, something the Federation apparently never mass-produced." Wu exchanged a glance with Elena. Even 3 might be enough if they can pierce Zhoren hulls. Better than 0, Elena agreed. We should integrate at least 1 warhead onto a submarine we can deploy quickly. The rest can be readied for city defense. Bigger nodded, then hesitated. Another detail, the Hydrolance warheads are partially guided by an AI module, some kind of advanced targeting system. The Federation's logs mention it was borderline experimental. We'd be trusting an old system not used in decades. Elena's jaw tightened. We don't have a choice. Keep me updated. I'll talk to command about pressing forward. Wu offered a strained smile. At least we have a fighting chance. You did good retrieving this stuff, Elena. Keep that in mind. Their next steps were complicated by the fact that New Atlantis had no functioning war submarines. Most of the city's aquatic craft were for research or transport, not heavy combat. Over the next few days, the engineering bay became a crucible of innovation. Crews stripped heavy plating off battered sea barges to reinforce a single attack sub hull. The sub's interior was gutted to make room for the Hydra Lance launcher. Welding, rewiring, frantic midnight checks, New Atlantis poured its dwindling resources into forging 1 lethal spear. Meanwhile, Elena spent long hours with the city's leadership council, including Admiral Brantley Walters, the de facto leader of all maritime defense. The council met in a circular chamber ringed by digital displays showing oceanic maps. Storm fronts coalesced where Zhoren ships lurked overhead. Undersea ridges glowed with possible alien outposts. Walters was a tall, imposing figure with scars from earlier conflicts. He tapped a map. We've identified a spot near the Mid-Atlantic Ridge where the Zhoren appear to be centralizing. If we strike them preemptively with the Hydrolance, we might cripple their undersea fortress before it's fully operational. One of the council members, an older woman named Dr. Okafor, shook her head. Attacking them first could provoke a massive retaliation. The city is vulnerable. Walter's voice rumbled like distant thunder. If we sit still, they'll finish building whatever they're building. Then they strike at full strength. We might not have a city left to protect. Elena stepped forward. I volunteer to lead the mission, sir. We've glimpsed how the Zhoren operate. If we can deliver a strong blow, take out key structures or leaders, it might buy us time to mass-produce more Hydrolances. The council debated, voices overlapping. Some argued for a purely defensive posture, others for immediate assault. Eventually, Walters raised a hand, silencing them. Lieutenant Serrano's plan aligns with Captain Wu's recommendations, he said slowly. We strike soon, precisely, minimizing risk to the city. We'll maintain a defensive perimeter around New Atlantis in case they respond quickly. A hush fell, tension tangible. Everyone knew the stakes. If the Hydra Lance mission failed, Earth might lose its last chance at maritime defense. Elena felt both fear and determination. The war had begun as a desperate struggle, but now they might tip the scale if they dared. By the end of that week, the newly refitted submarine, the ESS Resolute, stood ready in a submerged dock beneath the city. Painted a matte dark gray, bristling with jury-rigged sensor pods, it carried a single Hydrolance warhead in a specialized forward tube. The sub's reactor strained under extra demands, but Dr. Begum insisted it would hold together. Elena boarded the Resolute with a hand-picked crew. Sergeant Ree for security, Dr. Begum to handle technical anomalies, plus navigator Astrid Voss, comms officer Malik Shaw, and a small team of additional specialists. Captain Wu would oversee broader city defenses, ensuring that if the mission ended in disaster, New Atlantis could still endure. On the cramped command deck, Elena strapped into the captain's seat for the first time. The overhead lights flickered. She swallowed hard, gazing at the worn consoles. All right, everyone. Pre-dive checks. This sub's not the sturdiest, but she'll have to do. If the Hydrolance can deliver even one knockout blow, we'll consider this a success. They dived away from the city, deeper into open waters. The sub's thrusters hummed at half power to reduce acoustic signature. A hush settled among the crew. Outside, the ocean parted in silent gloom. New Atlantis receded behind them like a drifting star, its lights shimmering above the waves. Soon they were alone in enemy waters. Course set for the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, reported Astrid. ETA about 10 hours at stealth speed. We'll approach from below the thermocline to mask our heat signature. Elena nodded. Keep a close eye out for any Zhoren patrols. If we're detected early, we might not even get within launch range. Hours crawled by in tense monotony. Occasionally soft pings from an unidentified source made everyone hold their breath. The sub's sensors showed faint echoes drifting but no direct confrontation. Elena used the time to confer with Dr. Begum, on final warhead calibrations. He displayed a readout. The Hydrolance warhead must fuse with target hull plating for optimum effect. We have to get a direct hit. If the warhead misses by more than a few meters, it might fail to breach. She exhaled. Great. So basically no margin for error. Sergeant Reed gave a tight smile. We like challenges, right? Eventually, the sub-sensors picked up swirling electromagnetic patterns that matched known Zhoren signatures. The water grew warmer, tinted by chemical discharges. Over the comm, Astrid hissed, "We've reached the perimeter." "I'm reading artificial structures ahead, built into the ridge, possibly a base or a fortress." Elena ordered minimal power, slowing the sub's approach. Through the forward cameras, they caught flickers of glowing crystals embedded in rock, likely part of Zhoren infrastructure. Pillars jutted from the seabed, connected by tangles of shimmering cables. Strange aquatic drones glided around them, each orb streaming bluish light. Malik Shah murmured from comms, "We're intercepting coded pulses. Could be their local network. If we try to jam it, they'll notice. If we don't, they might track us anyway." Elena weighed the odds. We remain silent. Let's see how close we can get without triggering an alarm. We only get one shot. They advanced with agonizing slowness, weaving between rocky outcrops. Once, a swarm of drones passed overhead, forcing them to hug the seabed. Tense minutes stretched. The sub's hull groaned faintly in the pressure. Dr. Begum wiped sweat from his brow, eyes on the Hydrolance console. At last, they reached a vantage point behind a ridge, peering at the main structure. A monstrous dome carved into the seafloor, braced with alien metals. The dome pulsed with internal light. If the Zhoren completed this fortress, they might unleash unstoppable undersea raids. This was the target. Elena steadied her voice. "Navigation, set firing solution will launch from here, then we run like hell. The Hydrolance has a built-in guidance system. Let's hope it's enough." Astrid's fingers flew over the console. Coordinates locked, warhead armed. Ree cracked his knuckles. "Time to show these invaders what Earth can do." Elena took a final breath. Fire! The sub shuddered as the Hydrolance torpedo launched, water swirling around it. Through the cameras, they watched the warhead's thruster ignite, streaking toward the dome. At first, it seemed to vanish into the murky gloom. Seconds ticked by. Then an alarm shrilled through the sub speakers. "Hostile pings!" The Zhoren had noticed the incoming projectile. "Drones converging," Malik snapped. The camera feed showed streams of bluish orbs speeding after the torpedo. One beam struck it, sending a flare of sparks. Elena's heart lurched. If the torpedo was destroyed mid-run, all was lost. She gritted her teeth. The Hydrolance's final thruster stage kicked in, zigzagging erratically. Zhoren drones fired again, near misses. Then it slammed into the dome's hull. A flash of brilliant aqua light filled the screen, followed by a violent shockwave. The dome's outer plating bulged. Part of it vaporized in a swirl of energy. A swirling hole formed, releasing a torrent of escaping water pressure. An entire section of the dome caved inward. Cheers erupted on the sub. Elena allowed herself a brief grin. They had struck a crippling blow. But the fight wasn't over. The sensors lit up with approaching signatures. Dozens of drones plus something bigger. "Time to go," she yelled. They spun the sub around, thrusters flaring at maximum. The sub lurched away from the fortress, which now reeled in watery flames. Harsh bursts of alien weaponry streaked past them, lighting the deep. One beam clipped the sub's tail, making the cabin flicker with electrical sparks. Elena clung to her seat. "Damage report." Dr. Begum's voice trembled. "Minor hull breach in the aft section, but containment's holding. Reactor stable for now." Ree and Astrid guided them between ridges. More beams cut the water, forcing them to swerve. The sub's hull squealed in protest. Alarms howled. Then, all at once, the sensor array erupted with an even larger contact behind them. The camera feed flickered, revealing a monstrous silhouette. A Zhoren capital sub, if that was the right term, lurking behind the fortress, shaped like a giant stingray with luminous fins. It launched a barrage of swirling plasma torpedoes, each tracing neon arcs. Elena shouted, "Brace for impact!" They veered hard. The first torpedo whooshed by, detonating against a rock formation. Searing water hammered the sub, sending it spinning. The second torpedo skimmed the sub's bow. Hull plating peeled away. Sparks rained. Pressure gauges flashed red. Somehow the sub stabilized. Half the consoles flickered offline. They were venting oxygen. The Zhoren capital sub closed in, ready to finish them off. Alina's mind spun. If they died here, their successful strike on the fortress would still matter, but she refused to give in. She hammered a console button. Fire decoys all channels. Overload the radio with random signals. Malik unleashed a flurry of noise bursts. The water erupted with false pings and sensor illusions. The Zhoren sub hesitated, scanning the confusion. The Resolute used that moment to plunge into a narrow canyon, scraping its underside on jagged coral. Ree cursed as the sub jolted, but they squeezed through. Seconds later, the sensor feed showed the Zhoren capital subs searching fruitlessly beyond the canyon. Elena's crew limped away, battered but alive. A final muffled explosion behind them signaled the fortress's partial collapse. They had struck a blow. Now, if they could only get home. Back in New Atlantis, euphoria sparked through the population at word of the mission's success. Though battered, the Resolute had returned. The Hydra Lance destroyed a key Zhoren stronghold. No longer would the city watch from the sidelines. Celebrations broke out on every deck. Civilians hoisted banners that read, "We endure." Children cheered outside the battered concourses, and volunteer defenders wore triumphant smiles. Yet Elena could not rest. She limped off the sub, ignoring the pain of bruised ribs. Captain Wu met her on the dock. He clasped her shoulder. "Outstanding job, Serrano. We've slowed them down, maybe forced them to reconsider pushing further." She nodded, exhaustion etched in every line of her face. "We lost half our hull plating. That big sub they had? It's no joke." Wu gave her a sympathetic look. "We'll patch you up. Also, Admiral Walters wants a briefing. We're seeing signs of major movement from the Zhoren armada above. Possibly retribution for this hit." Elena clenched her fists. "Then we need to be ready." She convened with the city's leadership council in their war room, a curved space lined with holo screens. Admiral Walters leaned over a digital table that projected the Earth's oceans, dotted with red icons signifying suspected Zhoren presences. The Mid-Atlantic Fortress icon now flickered as disabled. Walters looked up. "Excellent strike. We have confirmation the fortress partially collapsed. The blow is worse for them than we hoped. We even overheard scrambled transmissions, some alien language implying a significant setback." A hush fell among the council, a subdued wave of hope. But then Walters sighed. "Unfortunately, new reports indicate a large cluster of Zhoren ships descending from orbit toward the southern hemisphere. They might be pivoting from building ocean bases to direct assault. Our city is in the crosshairs." A councilwoman, Dr. Weiss, frowned. "We can't stand against a full-scale fleet. One Hydra Lance sub is not enough to fight multiple ships. Has the Earth Federation truly disbanded to the point where we get no reinforcements?" Wu's mouth tightened. "The Federation's pretty much gone. Most major coastal cities were destroyed. Some rumor smaller enclaves survive, Arctic bunkers, deep jungle hideouts, but we have no official contact. We're alone." Elena's throat felt dry. "What about the other Hydra Lance warheads? We only used one. If we can equip multiple subs or add them to our city's perimeter defenses, maybe we can repel an aerial strike." Dr. Begum, standing near the chamber door, raised his hand. "We're working as fast as we can, but forging new Hydra Lances takes time and the sub is heavily damaged." Walter's face hardened. "Then time is what we don't have. We must assume the Zhoren will arrive in days." It dawned on Elena that they stood at a pivotal moment in Earth's history. Again, the final stand for New Atlantis. She refused to let fear paralyze her. "We'll do everything we can. If we hold out, maybe the Zhoren see that subjugating us isn't worth the cost." Walters gave a grim nod. "Get some rest, Lieutenant. We'll need you soon." Outside the war room, Elena found Ree, Begum, Astrid, and Shaw waiting. They looked to her as though searching for reassurance. She mustered a tired smile. "We keep going, no matter what." Even as the city mobilized, a wave of dread spread through the population. The battered war submarine was still weeks from full repair. Hydra Lance production was slow. Meanwhile, Zhoren ships loomed overhead, forming bright pinpricks in the sky at night. The storms they conjured roiled the sea, spawning fierce waves that hammered the city's hull. Some deck sections had to be sealed off. Despite the gloom, a small but significant breakthrough arrived in the form of an unexpected signal. Late one night, the communications tower on the city's upper spire caught a faint transmission from the west. With power reserves so strained no one had scanned widely. Now a watch officer named Corporal Jane had stumbled upon it. Elena hurried to the comm station. Corporal Jane played back the snippet, a distorted voice in heavily accented English. "This is Outpost Axiom requesting contact with any survivors. Coordinate set. Facing Zhoren raids." A chill of excitement shot through Elena. Other human enclaves still existed. Outpost Axiom. She flicked a glance at Wu, who stood by with folded arms. "We have to respond. If they're also resisting, we might coordinate." Wu nodded. "Agreed. Let's see if they have any functional forces, maybe a leftover Federation cruiser?" They transmitted a cautious reply. Hours later, a full response arrived, crackling with static. "We read you, New Atlantis." We're a partially submerged fortress near the old Caribbean Isles. Small population, ex-Federation troops. We heard rumors of your city. The Zhoren have hammered us, but we hold. If we pool resources, we stand a better chance. Over. Elena's pulse quickened. "An alliance?" She turned to Wu. "Even if they're not a huge force, that synergy might tip the scales." They arranged a meeting. Outpost Axiom's leader, Commander Femi Oshiro, would come by seaplane, a relic from earlier times. In less than a day, the plane arrived, battered but airborne, landing precariously near the city's floating docks. Elena and Wu greeted Oshiro personally. She was a tall woman with a regal bearing, her right arm replaced by a crude cybernetic prosthesis. "New Atlantis is even more impressive than the legends," she commented, stepping onto the steel deck. "I see you faced your share of battles." Wu offered a respectful nod. "We can't do it alone." In the city's council chamber, Oshiro laid out Axiom's situation. They had about 1,000 survivors, a handful of coastal gun batteries, and a single functioning corvette from the old Federation Navy. The corvette was armed with rail cannons. Powerful, but no match for top-tier Zhoren craft on its own. Admiral Walters rubbed his chin. "A rail-armed corvette plus our Hydrolance sub might form a decent attack group. Combined with any coastal defenses you can rig on our city perimeter, we might repel the next wave." Oshiro's prosthetic arm whirred softly. "We also have a lead on a possible Federation microfusion plant. If we retrieve that, we could ramp up production of your Hydrolances." Elena's eyes lit. "Where is it?" "Deep in the Sargasso expanse. In Zhoren-held waters." A hush fell. Everyone recognized the pattern. Another infiltration, more risk. But Elena was not deterred. She asked quietly, "How much time do we have until the next big assault?" Wu consulted a weather satellite feed. "We suspect days, maybe a week at most. Hard to say." Commander Oshiro breathed a sigh. "That might not be enough for a salvage mission, but if that fusion plant is real, we solve your power bottleneck, mass-produce hydrolances, and actually face the Zhoren on better footing." Walters eyed Elena. "It's your call, Lieutenant. If you fail, we lose precious time preparing the city. But if you succeed..." She straightened her shoulders. "I'll lead a small strike team. If it becomes suicidal, we pull back. Our city is worth the gamble." A flicker of admiration crossed Oshiro's face. "Then we stand with you. Axiom's corvette can escort you part way. If we time it right, we might slip through the storms the Zhoren have whipped up." Thus, humanity's battered enclaves prepared yet another desperate mission. For Elena, it felt like diving into the unknown all over again. But she remembered how they had seized the Hydrolance from an abandoned Federation base. The ocean was vast, Earth's last domain. Perhaps it still held secrets to turn the tide of war. The Sargasso expanse was a zone of myth and peril even before the Zhoren arrived. An endless tangle of seaweed mats, swirling currents, and lost ships. Now swirling alien storms made the region doubly dangerous. But that was exactly where Commander Oshiro believed the Federation microfusion plant lay hidden. At dawn, Elena's newly repaired sub, the Resolute, slipped away from New Atlantis, escorted by Axiom's corvette, the HFV Trinidad. The plan was for the corvette to break away once they neared heavier Zhoren patrols, acting as a decoy if needed. The sub would then dive deep to find the rumored facility. Through fierce winds and choppy seas, the small flotilla pressed on. Astrid guided the sub from the console, cursing every wave that battered them. Over comms, the Trinidad's captain, a wiry man named Rain, joked about drawing the short straw, but the tension was evident in his voice. If the Zhoren caught them out here, they might be cut to ribbons. As they neared the heart of the expanse, thick seaweed mats clogged the surface. The water turned dark, swirling with debris. Dr. Beguillum studied sensor readouts. Sensors are half blind in this soup, possibly the reason the facility was placed here in the first place, natural camouflage. Elena had them dive again, slipping beneath the dense weed layer. The sublights illuminated bizarre marine life, translucent eels, luminescent shrimp scuttling across drifting metal scraps. They even glimpsed the rusted hull of an ancient cargo ship. The deeper they went, the more ephemeral the environment became, as though the sea itself were haunted by centuries of wrecks. Finally, after hours of scanning, the sub pinged a large artificial structure on the seabed. It matched Federation design parameters. Eagerly, they approached. But no sooner had they drawn close than the sensor alarms flared red. A cluster of unknown signals converged overhead. Zhoren drones? Possibly. Or something else. This is happening every time, Sergeant Ree muttered. They're always one step ahead. Elena forced composure. Keep quiet. Maybe we slip by. They found a partially collapsed Federation dome nestled among silt and rock, resembling the one from the previous mission but larger. The sub latched onto an airlock. Meanwhile, they heard faint echoes of engine noise in the water above. Maybe patrol craft or drones. Time was short. Leaving Dr. Begum at the sub controls, Elena and Ree took a small team inside. Commander Oshiro insisted on joining them, accompanied by one of her Axiom soldiers named Delgado. The corridor was in better shape than the previous facility, with flickering overhead lights and minimal flooding. They navigated crates and toppled equipment. There, Oshiro whispered, shining her flashlight on a sealed bulkhead. If the logs were correct, the microfusion plant is behind that door. Ree approached with caution. Stand back. Let me rig the manual override. A tense minute passed as Ree fiddled with old mechanical systems. A hiss, then the door slid ajar, revealing a chamber bristling with battered consoles and metallic cylinders. In the center loomed a cylindrical device the size of an elevator shaft. Markings read Federation Pre-Programmed MFP-7. Beside it stood half a dozen coolant lines clearly ruptured. Delgado swore under his breath. Looks like a mess, but maybe salvageable. Elena advanced, scanning the device. We just need the core and control rods, right? The rest can be improvised in the city or Axiom. Oshiro nodded. Yes, if we can unbolt it carefully. We break it, we might flood the chamber with radioactive steam. They worked with frantic determination. Reed detached external conduits. Delgado manned a portable crane from the corridor, inching the heavy assembly onto a pallet. All the while, Elena worried about the presence overhead. The hair on her neck prickled. She imagined Zhoren drones already homing in. A clang startled them. Something hammered on the outer hatch of the facility. Water dripped from the ceiling. The lights flickered. Reed tensed, pulling out his short-range underwater rifle. We've got company, I think. Oshiro cursed softly. We're not done. Another couple minutes. Elena pressed her earpiece. Begum, you reading any movement? His voice crackled. Yes, multiple bogies around the sub. I've had to seal the airlock. Hurry. They redoubled efforts, hauling the heavy microfusion cylinder. As they moved down the corridor, shapes scuttled overhead. Zhoren drones had penetrated the structure, resembling pale crustaceans with luminescent panels. Delgado fired a burst, driving them back. Green sparks flared. Go, go, Elena barked. They reached the sub's airlock to find it barricaded from the inside. Dr. Begum opened a small viewport, eyes wide. Drones keep trying to slice in. I'm letting you in, then we run. The door slid open. Everyone shoved the microfusion plant onto the sub's cramped cargo deck. Dr. Begum sealed the hatch behind them. Alarms blared. The entire sub shuddered. Engine sabotage, Astrid yelled from the pilot seat. They're messing with our thrusters. Ree and Oshiro slammed an override panel. Delgado strapped down the fusion cylinder as the sub pitched dangerously. On external cams, they glimpsed multiple drones clinging to the hull, slicing at cables with needle limbs. Water seeped into the sub's lower compartments. Elena felt dread coil in her stomach. Shake 'em off, she ordered. Full thrusters. Short bursts. The sub lurched, rotating. One drone was crushed against a rock outcrop, another slid away, severed wires sparking. Then the overhead sensors flashed with a new threat. A large Zhoren craft diving from above. No time to fight. They had to flee. Elena roared, "Punch it, Astrid!" With a groan, the sub's main engine kicked, tearing free from the facility's docking clamp. Sonic pulses hammered them from the alien craft. Lights flickered, but the sub sped into the open sea. away from the Sargasso bed. One last glimpsed image showed the Zhoren craft firing a volley that missed by yards, stirring massive clouds of sediment. They careened into deeper water. Dr. Begum balanced the failing reactor, resealed hull breaches. Delgado monitored the microfusion core for cracks. Commander Oshiro braced near the sensor console, face grim. At last, the sub's battered sensor array showed the Trinidad corvette waiting in deeper waters, guns at the ready. "We made it," Elena breathed. For now. The final battle came sooner than expected. By the time the sub and corvette limped back to New Atlantis, the city was under siege. Overhead, the Zhoren armada had darkened the skies with churning thunderheads. Plasma beams rained down, forcing the city's meager anti-air defenses to overheat. Dozens of smaller Zhoren ships hovered offshore, blasting at the hull to weaken it. Explosions echoed across the platform decks. Civilians huddled in shelters. Even as the sub docked, city comm channels erupted with pleas. Captain Wu commanded a desperate defense, launching improvised missiles from deck catapults. Admiral Walters coordinated from the central tower, voice calm but strained. "Serrano, if you can hear me, we need those hydrolances online now!" Elena scrambled from the sub, heartbreak twisting her gut at the sight of the battered city. Smoke rose from a tower spire. The ocean churned with alien storms. Ree helped carry the microfusion cylinder. Commander Oshiro barked orders to Delgado to link the cylinder to the city's power grid. Dr. Begum ran ahead, forging a path through panicked crowds. They reached the engineering bay. The Hydrolance assembly awaited. Within minutes, the microfusion plant's core rods were slotted into place, forging a stable power supply. Lights across the bay surged to full brightness. Dr. Begum whooped. "We have enough energy to produce more warheads now. Let's get them loaded on the perimeter turrets, plus rearm the Resolute if possible." Elena nodded. "We'll have to buy time. The Zhoren are already bombarding the city from above. The Trinidad can help hold off surface ships, but we also have that big Stingray sub out there." "I bet." Wu arrived, face streaked with soot. "We're forming a final defensive ring around the city. Walters wants you to lead the Hydrolance deployment on our new top-deck turret. We rigged one quickly." She saluted, ignoring the swirling chaos. "Yes, sir." The top deck was a war zone. Fires burned among collapsed structures. Anti-air guns spat tracers at the swirling clouds. High overhead hovered a wedge-shaped Zhoren dreadnought, launching punishing beams at the city's hull. Each impact made the platform tremble. Amid the carnage, engineers and volunteers had erected a crude missile turret. Hydrolance components jutted from it, still faintly glowing. Dr. Begum supervised final calibrations, Captain Wu holding a rifle pointed upward. "We only have a single Hydrolance loaded. We might damage that dreadnought if we get a direct hit, but we have no tracking from this angle. It's an aerial ship, not underwater." Elena's mind raced. "We can't get a sub up there? Wait, we still have the Hydrolance's built-in AI. It might adapt mid-flight. If we give it a ballistic arc, it might self-correct." Wu gave a half-laugh of desperation. "It's insane. Let's do it. That dreadnought is tearing us to shreds." Under withering alien fire, the defenders cranked the turret around. Sergeant Reed joined them, blood trickling from a wound on his forehead. He grit his teeth, helping load the final warhead. Over comms, Walters declared an impending meltdown in the city's lower decks if the bombardment continued. Time was running out. "Coordinates locked," Dr. Begum shouted, sweat pouring down his face. "Firing in 3, 2, 1. A thunderous roar rocked the deck as the Hydrolance soared upward. For an instant it seemed too unwieldy, spiraling crookedly, but then a faint shimmer around its nose indicated the warhead's advanced AI kicking in. It corrected its trajectory, whirling higher, aimed at the wedge-shaped dreadnought. The watchers on deck collectively held their breath. The dreadnought saw it coming, rotating to unleash plasma beams. One grazed the warhead, igniting a flash. The crowd gasped, but the Hydrolance, battered, kept going. In a final burst, it struck the dreadnought's underside. An electric blue detonation erupted, large enough to silhouette the entire alien vessel. For a heartbeat, the dreadnought hovered, riddled with arcs of swirling energy. Then it listed, secondary explosions ripping through its hull. A deafening cheer rose from the defenders. Men and women fell to their knees in relief, weeping or embracing. The dreadnought slowly collapsed sideways, drifting away from the city. Its engines flared, trying to stabilize, but the Hydrolance had shattered its core. With a final roar, the giant craft careened into the sea, smashing waves hundreds of feet high. Tsunamis buffeted New Atlantis, forcing water over some decks, but the city's hull held firm. High overhead, the remaining Zhoren ships paused As if in shock, a quake of uncertainty seemed to pass through their formation. Then, one by one, they pulled back, vanishing into the cloud cover. Within minutes, the sky was clearing, the storm dissipated, the day was won. The people of New Atlantis stood battered, but victorious. In the aftermath, the city worked tirelessly to rebuild. Wrecked platforms were patched, flooded decks pumped out. The newly powered microfusion plant fueled the mass production of Hydra-Lance warheads. Word spread that the Zhoren had retreated to orbit or scattered into the deeper oceans, licking their wounds. Soon, other enclaves emerged from hiding. Outpost Axiom ferried over relief workers. A few smaller havens surfaced, sending messages of solidarity. Freed from the immediate threat, humanity began to coordinate efforts on a scale not seen since the old Federation's collapse. The Zhoren were still dangerous, but no longer unstoppable. Elena Serrano, newly promoted to commander, stood at the city's edge, gazing at the horizon. Commander Oshiro joined her, prosthetic arm glinting in the sunlight. They watched the battered hull of the Trinidad anchored alongside smaller fishing vessels. Children ran across the deck, ignoring the lingering scars of battle. "It's not over," Oshiro said softly. "The Zhoren remain a threat, but you showed them Earth isn't so easily conquered." Elena nodded. "We stand on a death world of sorts, a planet ravaged by climate, war, and now aliens. But we're still here, and we'll keep fighting, forging alliances, building better weapons if needed." Far above, the sky was returning to a gentle blue. The city's population, once paralyzed by fear, now bustled with hope. New Atlantis had refused to sink, forging a legend for future generations. In the swirling brine of Earth's seas, humanity had discovered new unity and unstoppable resolve. Sergeant Ree walked up, saluting. "Commander, the new Hydra-Lances are almost ready for distribution to Allied enclaves. We might push the Zhoren fully off the planet soon." Elena gave him a confident smile. "That's the plan, Sergeant. We adapt or die, and we'd much rather live." Down below, the waves lapped at the city's hull, a reminder of the ocean's might. Yet in that ceaseless motion lay Earth's heartbeat, unchained, resilient, and brimming with defiance. So long as humans drew breath, they would not drown beneath an alien tide. The story of New Atlantis was only beginning, carved into the rising and falling of the seas. Humanity, with salt in its veins and iron in its will, had proven its worth. This was their world, and no cosmic empire would wash it away.